The Franklin County Courthouse had seen everything: angry defendants, grieving families, shouting lawyers. But that morning, it carried a strange, restless energy. The kind that made the air feel heavier than usual, like a storm pressing down before the first crack of thunder. Courtroom 4B was packed. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of bodies squeezed too close together. Reporters lined the back wall, notebooks ready, cameras forbidden, but anticipation buzzing all the same. This case had drawn attention for weeks. A routine drug raid, a resisting arrest charge, a man claiming excessive force. A police department insisting procedure was followed to the letter. Everyone thought they already knew how it would end. At the front of the room, Judge Harold Whitman adjusted his glasses and scanned the crowd. 62 years old, 30 years on the bench. He'd learned to read a room quickly. Today's room was tight, tense, like it was holding its breath. The defendant sat beside his attorney, shoulders hunched, wrists folded together as if still bound. Daniel Carter hadn't spoken much since the trial began. He stared straight ahead, jaw locked, eyes ringed with exhaustion. 3 weeks in county jail had hollowed him out. So had something else, something deeper than fear. Across the aisle sat the prosecution team, crisp suits, neat files, calm confidence. To them, this was a clean case. The report was clear. The bodycam footage edited, approved, signed, supported their version of events. And then there was Rex. The German Shepherd lay at the feet of Officer Mark Reynolds, muscles coiled even at rest. His black and tan coat gleamed under fluorescent lights. The word police was stitched boldly across his vest, as if daring anyone to question his role. Rex had been praised in the media, an elite K-9, disciplined, decorated, dependable. To the court, he was equipment. To the defense, he was a question mark. No one paid attention to the little girl at first. She sat 2 rows back, feet not touching the floor, legs swinging slowly in the empty space beneath the bench. Her name was Lily Carter, 3 years old, brown curls tied loosely behind her head, already slipping free. She wore a yellow dress with tiny white flowers wrinkled from being slept in. In her lap rested a stuffed rabbit, one ear missing, fur worn thin from years of love. She wasn't supposed to be there. Children rarely were. Her mother, Emily Carter, sat rigid beside her, one arm wrapped protectively around Lily's shoulders. Emily hadn't slept much since the arrest. Her eyes were red, her face pale, as if color had been drained out of her one worry at a time. She kept whispering soft reassurances into Lily's hair. "Just sit quietly, baby. Okay, just sit." Lily nodded, but her eyes kept wandering. They moved around the room with unsettling focus, taking everything in: the judge's robe, the shiny shoes of the lawyers, the way the ceiling fans hummed softly overhead. And then her gaze landed on Rex. She froze. Her swinging legs slowed, then stopped completely. Rex lifted his head. For a moment, child and dog locked eyes. Something passed between them, something invisible, something no one else noticed because no one else was looking. Rex's ears twitched, his tail stilled. Lily's small fingers tightened around the rabbit so hard her knuckles turned white. Her breathing changed. Emily felt it instantly. Mothers always did. "Lily," she whispered, "what's wrong?" Lily didn't answer. At the front of the courtroom, the prosecutor continued questioning Officer Reynolds, walking the jury through the timeline. Entry was made at 9:14 p.m. Yes. The suspect resisted. He did. And K-9 Rex was deployed only after verbal commands failed. That's correct. The words floated over Lily's head like distant noise. All she could hear was barking. Not now, then. Loud, sharp, too close. Her body stiffened. Her chest rose and fell faster. No, she whispered. Emily leaned closer. What did you say, honey? Lily shook her head, eyes never leaving the dog. He was there. Emily followed her gaze, and felt her stomach drop. "No, sweetheart," she said quickly, panic creeping into her voice. "That's just a dog. Remember what I told you. We don't." But Lily was already moving. She slid off the bench before Emily could stop her, her rabbit tumbling to the floor. The sound, soft fabric hitting wood, was barely audible, but somehow it sliced through the courtroom noise like a blade. Heads turned. The judge paused mid-sentence. Lily stood in the aisle, impossibly small in a room full of power and authority. Her yellow dress looked too bright against the dark wood and gray suits. Her hands trembled at her sides. Emily shot to her feet. "I'm sorry, she's just a child." But Lily raised her arm. Her finger extended. It pointed straight at Rex. The courtroom stilled. Officer Reynolds tightened his grip on the leash without realizing he'd done it. Rex rose slowly to a sitting position, nails clicking faintly against the floor. "What is this?" the prosecutor muttered. Judge Whitman leaned forward. "Ma'am, please take your seat." But Lily didn't lower her hand. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice, when it came, was clear. "That dog," she said. The sound of it echoed far louder than it should have. Every conversation stopped. Every movement froze. Even the ceiling fan seemed to hum more quietly. Emily covered her mouth, horror spreading across her face. The defense attorney's heart slammed against his ribs. The judge stared at the child, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. Rex let out a low whine. Lily swallowed hard. "He was there," she whispered. No one breathed. The judge opened his mouth to speak. And Lily took a step forward. Her finger still pointed. Her eyes still locked on the dog. And whatever she was about to say next felt heavy enough to crack the room in half. The courtroom held its breath. Even the air seemed heavier, pregnant with anticipation. The low hum of murmurs faded to nothing as every pair of eyes shifted toward the tiny figure standing in the aisle. Lily Carter, 3 years old, stared at Rex with unflinching intensity, her small hand still raised, trembling slightly but unwavering. Her mother, Emily, had frozen. Her lips parted but no sound came out. Emily had seen her daughter repeat lines from nursery rhymes or mimic the phrases she'd overheard adults say, but nothing like this. Not this. Not pointing at a police dog and not in the middle of a courtroom, where adults talked in clipped, controlled sentences about law, procedure, and protocol. Rex shifted slightly. His head tilted, ears pricked, muscles coiled like springs. Officer Mark Reynolds' fingers tightened around the leash. He had trained the dog for years. He had trained him to listen, to respond to commands, to remain calm under chaos. But this was unpredictable. Something in Lily's gaze made the dog uneasy. "Sweetheart," Emily's voice trembled. Do you need to sit down?" Lily shook her head slowly, and the judge leaned forward, squinting over his glasses. "Child," he said gently, "can you tell the court what you see?" She hesitated for a moment. Her lips quivered. The entire courtroom held a collective breath. Then, in a voice so small yet clear, it cut through the silence like glass breaking. "He was there when Daddy cried." A collective gasp swept through the room. Papers rustled, pens stopped scratching. Reporters stiffened, cameras forgotten. The judge blinked, slowly, uncertain whether he'd heard correctly. Officer Reynolds' jaw tightened. The timeline he had memorized, the one corroborated in the official bodycam footage, did not include this. Rex had been deployed after the suspect was subdued. There was no record of the dog being inside while anyone was hurt. The prosecution team stiffened, exchanging nervous glances. Something in the child's statement didn't fit with their neat narrative. Emily covered her mouth with trembling hands. "Lily, honey, it's okay. You don't have to say anything." But Lily had already taken a step closer to the front, toward the jury box. Her tiny hand remained outstretched, pointing at Rex. Her gaze did not waver. The defense attorney, a tall man with gray-streaked hair and a pinched face, stood abruptly, clearing his throat. His voice shook slightly. "Your Honor, may I?" Judge Whitman raised a hand. "Let the child speak, but gently." The courtroom leaned forward. Not a single soul moved. The rustle of a page sounded deafening. Even Rex seemed to sense the shift, his tail low, muscles taut. Lily's lower lip quivered. Her brown eyes filled with tears. But she spoke again, each word deliberate. "He barked loud. Daddy, Daddy fell down." The room's silence grew heavier, oppressive. No one moved. The judge exchanged a glance with his clerk. The prosecutor's pen hovered over her notes, suddenly irrelevant. Every adult in that room had known a version of this case, one recorded in reports, in footage, in official statements. None had accounted for this 3-year-old girl. Daniel Carter, her father, stirred slightly. His head lifted from where it had hung low for the entire proceeding. His eyes, red and raw from exhaustion, filled with recognition. A flicker of something like fear or guilt passed over his face. He hadn't anticipated that anyone had seen everything. Certainly not his daughter. The defense attorney swallowed hard, adjusting his tie. He could feel the temperature in the room drop. Something fundamental had shifted. The evidence, the clean, sanitized sequence of events, was now being challenged by a child's recollection, a memory unfiltered by legal strategy or personal gain. Emily tried to whisper to Lily again, shaking her head, but Lily didn't break her gaze. She took another small step forward. "Daddy said it hurt, and the dog barked and barked." Officer Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, but he remained seated. He had been certain that the bodycam footage had told the whole story, that nothing unaccounted for had happened. But the child's voice, insistent and raw, suggested otherwise. The jury members leaned forward, pens poised but not writing. They could feel the tension radiating from the girl, from the dog, from the adults who were suddenly unsure of everything they had believed. The prosecution's confident air was beginning to crack. The judge cleared his throat. "Officer Reynolds," he said, his voice low and steady, "can you confirm the deployment time of K9 Rex inside the residence?" Mark Reynolds hesitated. He glanced at the screen at the side of the courtroom, where evidence slides and logs were projected, then back at the girl. "According to the report, deployment occurred after the suspect was secured," he said cautiously. Lily shook her head vigorously. "No, wrong," she cried. Her voice wavered but held strength. "Before, he came in before, and Daddy, he cried." The courtroom seemed to shift on its axis. Whispers rippled through the benches. The bailiff's hand instinctively went to his belt, though he knew he couldn't intervene. The judge's calm facade flickered. He was an experienced man who had seen outbursts before, but never had the courtroom's attention been hijacked by someone so small, so fragile, yet so commanding. The defense attorney finally spoke again, his voice steady but urgent. "Your Honor, I request the court review the bodycam footage in its entirety. There may be discrepancies between the report and the actual events. It is critical for the truth to be revealed." The prosecutor, stiff-backed and pale, objected immediately. "Your Honor, this request is unprecedented and unnecessary. The report was filed correctly. All evidence submitted meets the standards of the law." Judge Whitman raised a hand, silencing the room. His gaze shifted from the adult lawyers to the little girl standing alone, pointing at a German shepherd who now whined softly, unsettled. "Quiet," he said. "Everyone, let the child finish her statement. Then we will review the evidence as needed." Lily's voice was small now, almost a whisper, but it carried in the silent courtroom. "Daddy, he was scared. The dog, he barked at Daddy, and Daddy fell down, and I watched." Even the most hardened members of the courtroom felt the weight of her words. The tiny girl, clutching nothing but a tattered stuffed rabbit, had dismantled months of careful preparation and official narratives in under a minute. Emily rushed forward instinctively, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Lily, sweetie, please sit down." But the girl did not move. She had done what children always do when they cannot be silenced. She spoke her truth. Daniel Carter, his hands trembling, lifted his face from where it had rested against his folded arms. He was no longer just a defendant. He was a father confronted by the memory of his own fear mirrored in the unflinching honesty of his daughter. The German shepherd, sensing the emotional charge in the room, let out a soft growl, a warning, a response, a question. Rex's presence was no longer merely procedural, it had become elemental, a living testament to the chaos of that night. The judge adjusted his glasses, took a slow breath, and looked over at the courtroom. "This is highly unusual," he said, his voice calm but measured. "But children's testimony is not invalid solely because of age. Let it be recorded." The prosecutor's face hardened. "Your Honor, the child is barely able to understand the proceedings. This testimony should be stricken from the record." But the judge held up his hand. "No, let the record show that a child of 3 years has given a statement. Let it be preserved in full, and we will address the admissibility formally. Proceed." Lily's mother finally moved to her daughter, kneeling beside her, brushing back curls from the girl's face. "Honey, I'm so sorry you saw that," she whispered, her voice breaking. But Lily's attention never left the dog. Her little chest rose and fell rapidly. She pointed once more, decisively, her voice cracking with urgency. "Rex, he came inside before Daddy fell. He barked and Daddy cried, and I saw it." The courtroom froze. Every adult present felt the weight of her words, as if the smallest witness had just torn open a veil hiding the truth. No one spoke. No one breathed. For the first time in weeks, the narrative that had seemed so airtight now wobbled dangerously. Judge Whitman leaned back slightly, his fingers gripping the bench. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. The child's declaration had done something extraordinary. It had made the room remember, for the first time, that truth could come from the most unexpected places. Lily's words hung in the air, a fragile but undeniable accusation. And in that quiet, every adult in the courtroom, lawyers, jury, officers, reporters, understood something chilling. The smallest voice in the room had just taken control. And the room stayed silent. The kind of silence that doesn't end. The courtroom seemed to shrink under the weight of Lily's words. Even the fluorescent lights above seemed dimmer, flickering slightly, as if the universe itself had paused to witness what a 3-year-old had just revealed. Lawyers shifted in their seats, papers rustling nervously, but no one dared break the silence. All eyes were on the child, her tiny frame unwavering, her fingers still pointed toward Rex, the German shepherd who had become both witness and participant in a moment that no one could have anticipated. Daniel Carter, his hands trembling on the bench, finally lifted his head. His red, swollen eyes darted to his daughter. For the first time in weeks, his expression betrayed raw vulnerability. He hadn't expected Lily to remember. He hadn't anticipated that she could observe, comprehend, or recall the details of the night that had upended his life. His jaw tightened, and he swallowed, trying to push down the panic clawing at his chest. Emily Carter, Lily's mother, leaned forward, her knuckles white against the bench, heart hammering in her chest. She had tried to shield Lily from this world, the anger, the fear, the violence, but the child had seen more than she should have, more than she had imagined, and now the courtroom bore witness to it. Officer Mark Reynolds shifted uncomfortably at the front of the room. Rex sat rigidly beside him, ears pricked, eyes flicking from Lily to her father and back again. Reynolds had trained Rex for years. He had memorized every command, every behavior, every scenario the dog could face. Yet here, in the sterile order of the courtroom, everything he thought he knew teetered on the edge of chaos. The defense attorney, Jonathan Mayers, finally stood. His normally steady hands shook slightly as he cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said, his voice rising but controlled, "I must request the court recognize the importance of this testimony. This child, though young, has provided a perspective not reflected in the official reports or bodycam footage. The prosecutor, Samantha Riley, frowned sharply, brushing her auburn hair behind her ear. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. The child is 3 years old. She cannot possibly understand the events in a legal context. Her statements are emotionally charged but inadmissible as evidence. The court must strike this testimony." Judge Whitman, who had decades of courtroom experience, leaned forward, hands gripping the bench. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he did not speak immediately. Silence fell again, stretching tight, taut, until it felt like the room might shatter from the weight of anticipation. Emily moved instinctively toward Lily. "Honey," she whispered, voice trembling, "sit down, please, you don't have to." But Lily did not sit. She was fully absorbed in what she was seeing, what she was remembering, and what she felt compelled to declare. Her tiny chest rose and fell rapidly, her finger unwavering, her voice quivering yet remarkably strong for a child her age. "He barked," Lily said, her words breaking the silence like splintering glass. "Loud, he barked and Daddy fell, and I saw it." Rex let out a low, wary whine. Officer Reynolds' grip on the leash tightened instinctively. The dog had been there, yes, but the official timeline said otherwise. Everything in the reports, the logs, the videos, the testimonies, painted a different picture. But the child's words suggested an unrecorded truth. Daniel's defense attorney moved closer to his client, whispering urgently, almost to himself. "This is it. This is the crack we've been waiting for. We need the footage, all of it, not just the sanitized version." Samantha Riley, the prosecutor, bristled. Her confidence, carefully cultivated over months of preparation, began to falter. "Your Honor, the video has already been reviewed. It matches the official timeline. We do not need." Judge Whitman held up a hand, silencing the room. His gaze swept over everyone, lingering on the child who had now become the focal point of the trial. "Quiet," he said firmly. "The testimony of a child, no matter the age, cannot be dismissed outright. Let the record reflect that this testimony is acknowledged and preserved, and the footage will be reviewed in full, unedited." A murmur spread through the room. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, aware that this was no ordinary courtroom drama. The cameras at home, broadcasting live to thousands, captured the tension, the uncertainty, the small but undeniable power of a 3-year-old girl's memory. Emily Carter sank to her knees beside Lily, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm so sorry you had to see that baby," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I tried to protect you." Lily's eyes, wide and unblinking, never left Rex, her finger still pointed. "Daddy said it hurt," she added, her voice breaking slightly. "He said it hurt and the dog he barked, and I saw it." The jury shifted in their seats, pens poised but idle. The room had shifted from a standard courtroom to a theater of raw, unfiltered truth. No one had expected the neat, controlled narrative of the prosecution to be challenged in this way, and certainly not by a child. Officer Reynolds' face was pale. He had trained for unpredictable scenarios, for aggression, for chaos, but not this. A 3-year-old, unafraid, pointing out a sequence of events that directly contradicted months of careful reporting. The defense attorney finally spoke again, voice steady now but underlined with urgency. "Your Honor, the timeline in the official logs and bodycam footage does not match what this child has just described. We need the original, unedited footage immediately. I request that it be retrieved and played for the court without delay." Samantha Riley's eyes narrowed. "Your Honor, the footage is accurate. The logs are verified. This request is unnecessary and obstructive." Judge Whitman interrupted sharply. "Enough. The record will reflect the request. The footage will be reviewed in full. No edits, no selective playback, and the child's testimony will remain preserved." Rex whined again, uneasy. Even he seemed to sense that something fundamental had shifted. His calm, disciplined demeanor had given way to tension, and his eyes flicked repeatedly between Daniel and Lily. Daniel Carter's face crumpled as he realized what his daughter had done. He hadn't planned for her to remember, and now he could see the truth reflected in her unwavering gaze. His defenses, carefully built over weeks, were crumbling. Lily's mother whispered again, trying to soothe her. "Honey, you don't have to." But Lily shook her head. She wasn't finished. Her voice, small but filled with determination, rose above the room's tense silence. "Rex came inside before Daddy fell," she said. "He barked and Daddy cried, and I saw it all." The courtroom froze. Every adult present felt the weight of her words. The prosecutors, confident just minutes ago, exchanged worried glances. The jury, trained to remain impartial, couldn't ignore the piercing clarity of a child pointing out what no adult had been able to convey. Judge Whitman leaned back slightly, fingers tightening on the bench. The gravity of the moment pressed down on him. He had presided over countless trials, but nothing in his 30 years had prepared him for this. The testimony of a child so young, so seemingly innocent, carrying the weight of truth that adults had overlooked. Even the reporters, hidden behind notepads and discreet scribbles, sensed the historic nature of the moment. Their hands paused mid-note, cameras resting against their chests. This wasn't a story about procedure anymore. It was about observation, memory, and the undeniable courage of a child confronting what had been hidden in plain sight. Emily's hands shook as she reached for Lily, tears streaming freely now. But Lily's focus remained unbroken. The smallest witness in the room had become the most important, and her words, though tiny in volume, were seismic in impact. The judge exhaled slowly, finally breaking the silence. "Let the record reflect that the child has provided testimony indicating a sequence of events contrary to the official account. The court will review the bodycam footage in full to verify these statements." As the courtroom shifted, preparing for the footage, Lily stood firm, still pointing. Her small finger had become a beacon, drawing attention to a truth that no one else had dared to acknowledge. And then, just before the proceedings paused for review, Lily whispered once more, barely audible, but heavy with certainty. "I saw it all." The room went silent. Not a single person moved. Not a single word was spoken. And in that silence, the weight of her words settled over everyone like a storm cloud, undeniable, uncomfortable, and impossible to ignore. The air in courtroom 4B had grown thick, heavy, almost suffocating. Each word Lily spoke seemed to echo off the polished wood panels, reverberating through the room like a warning. The 3-year-old girl had appended everything. Reports, video footage, witness statements, all of it suddenly felt incomplete, unreliable. What everyone had thought was a tidy, linear case had begun to crumble under the weight of her memory. Officer Reynolds remained rooted in place, gripping the leash of Rex, his German shepherd who now mirrored his tension. Rex's low, wary growl punctuated the silence, a subtle reminder that beneath the veneer of calm, even trained dogs could sense danger. Reynolds had prepared for countless unpredictable scenarios, yet nothing in his career had prepared him for a toddler pointing out a flaw in his timeline. Emily Carter sat with her hands over her mouth, knees pressed together. She was caught between pride and fear, knowing her daughter was speaking the truth, but terrified of what it could mean for Daniel, for herself, and for the family's future. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. The defense attorney, Jonathan Mayers, had risen again, adjusting his tie and clearing his throat. His face was pale, but his voice carried a sense of urgent calm. "Your Honor," he began, "it is evident that the child has observed events not fully reflected in the official documentation. Therefore, it is critical that we review the unedited bodycam footage immediately. The integrity of this evidence is at stake." Prosecutor Samantha Riley's jaw tightened. She had prepared this case meticulously, and every second of the official record had been scrutinized. But now, A tiny voice had thrown doubt into her meticulous timeline. She opened her mouth to object, but the judge raised a hand, cutting her off before she could speak. Judge Whitman, face stoic but eyes sharp, addressed Officer Reynolds directly. "Officer, can you confirm the exact time Rex entered the residence?" Reynolds' throat felt dry. He had memorized the logs, studied the videos frame by frame, rehearsed every detail countless times. "According to the report, Your Honor," he said slowly, "Rex was deployed after the suspect was secured and subdued." Lily shook her head violently, the curls on her temples bouncing. "No, wrong," she cried. "He came inside before. Daddy, Daddy cried." Every adult in the courtroom felt the shift. The child's declaration challenged the foundational timeline. The prosecution team's confidence faltered, and even the jury members, trained to remain impartial, exchanged uneasy glances. Something in Lily's eyes conveyed certainty, not confusion. She remembered. She understood. She had observed. Emily Carter's voice broke as she whispered to her daughter, "Lily, please, honey, sit down." But Lily did not. She stood tall, the tiny figure unwavering, and repeated the words that would send a ripple through the courtroom. "He barked at Daddy, he barked, and Daddy fell down." The defense attorney exhaled sharply, sensing an opportunity. "Your Honor, the footage provided by the prosecution is incomplete. There are missing sequences, time gaps that do not reflect the full chain of events. I request a full review of all unedited footage to ensure the accuracy of the official record." Riley stiffened. "Your Honor, the video footage has been verified. The logs and bodycam data match the recorded events precisely. The defense's claim is speculative and unwarranted." Judge Whitman adjusted his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He had presided over countless trials, but few had ever involved testimony from a 3-year-old child that could directly contradict sworn officer statements. "The record will reflect the request," he said firmly. "The footage will be reviewed in full, without edits or selective omission." Rex, sensing the growing tension, stood up slowly. His body coiled, eyes darting between Lily and Daniel. Even the dog seemed to recognize that the narrative the courtroom had accepted for weeks was now being questioned by a child who had witnessed it all. Daniel Carter's hands trembled. For the first time since the arrest, he lifted his face and looked around. His expression was raw, vulnerable, haunted. He had not anticipated that Lily would remember. He had not thought her capable of piecing together the sequence of events, of observing what adults had dismissed or overlooked. And now she had not only observed, she had articulated it with terrifying clarity. The jury shifted in their seats, pens poised but idle. The room felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls were leaning inward, pressing on everyone present. This trial, so carefully structured and meticulously recorded, had been thrown into uncertainty by a child's recollection. Emily knelt beside Lily, brushing the curls from her face. "I'm sorry, baby," she whispered, tears running down her cheeks. "I tried to protect you, but you saw everything." Lily's eyes remained fixed on Rex. Her voice, soft yet insistent, carried across the silent room. "Rex came inside before Daddy fell. He barked, and I saw Daddy hurt." Officer Reynolds' grip on the leash tightened. He had trained Rex to be calm under pressure, to follow commands, to act without hesitation. Yet here, in the sterile courtroom, Rex's instincts mirrored the tension in the room. His ears were pricked, muscles taut, eyes locked on Lily's tiny form. Judge Whitman leaned forward, fingers tightening on the bench. "We will proceed with the review of the full footage. The court needs to verify the sequence of events as described by the child." The clerk moved quickly to cue the video equipment. A monitor flickered to life at the front of the courtroom. Every lawyer, juror, and spectator turned their gaze toward the screen. Even Rex tilted his head as if anticipating what he would see. The first frames matched the official timeline. The suspect resisting, officers shouting, the flashing lights illuminating the room. But then, as the footage continued, subtle details emerged, shadows, positions, movements that no one had noticed. Rex entered the house earlier than the logs indicated. He barked repeatedly, inches from Daniel Carter, who recoiled in fear. Lily's words echoed in the minds of everyone watching. He barked and Daddy fell down. A murmur rose from the spectators, quickly hushed by the judge. The prosecution exchanged glances. The defense attorney leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "Your Honor, the timeline, it's inconsistent with the official report. The child's testimony is accurate." Riley's face paled. "There must be an error in the recording. This cannot be possible." Judge Whitman's expression hardened. "The court will verify every second. No edits, no selective playback. The full, unaltered footage will be reviewed immediately." The courtroom felt suspended in time. Even the reporters, hidden behind notepads, sensed the gravity of what they were witnessing. This was no longer just a legal proceeding. It was a confrontation with truth, raw, undeniable, and frightening. Emily Carter held Lily tightly as the video played on, heart hammering in her chest. She had tried to shield her child, to protect her from the violence of that night. But Lily had seen everything. And now, in this courtroom, she had spoken, unfiltered and unafraid. Daniel Carter's head fell into his hands again, shuddering. He realized with a cold clarity that no defense strategy could undo what his daughter had just revealed. The child's memory, vivid and precise, had exposed the cracks in every carefully constructed story. Lily's small hand finally dropped, but her voice remained in the room, carried in the memory of every person present. "I saw it all," she whispered. The judge leaned back, letting the weight of her words settle. The courtroom had shifted. The narrative everyone had relied on was no longer complete. A child had spoken, and suddenly the timeline that had seemed ironclad was open to scrutiny. Every adult in that room understood something fundamental. Truth could come from the smallest voice. And sometimes, the smallest voice could shatter the strongest facade. The silence that followed was palpable. No one moved. No one spoke. And outside the courtroom doors, reporters prepared to relay the scene, unaware that the child's testimony had already begun to unravel the entire case. Lily's words lingered in the air, heavy, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. The courtroom waited tense, knowing that what came next, the full review of the footage, could change everything. The courtroom fell into near darkness as the clerk dimmed the lights and cued the monitor at the front. Every person present, lawyers, jury, spectators, leaned forward in their seats. Even Rex shifted, ears pricked, tail low, sensing that something irreversible was about to unfold. The air was thick, tense, electric. Months of preparation, logs, bodycam footage, witness statements, all of it had been presumed airtight. Until now. The video began as expected. The timestamp read 9:14 p.m. The first frames matched the official account. Officers shouting, lights flashing in a chaotic blur, Daniel Carter resisting arrest, hands raised, the room alive with the sounds of authority and fear. The prosecution exhaled slightly, their confidence momentarily restored. This was exactly what they had anticipated. But as the footage continued, subtle shifts appeared. Shadows moved differently than expected. Officers' positions did not align perfectly with the official diagrams. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, Rex entered the frame, earlier than the logs indicated. The German Shepherd's paws hit the floor before the suspect was supposedly subdued, barking sharply, eyes locked on Daniel. Emily Carter gasped audibly, covering her mouth. The jury members stiffened. Even the reporters paused mid-scribble. For a child, especially one so young, to have observed this sequence with clarity was remarkable. But now, the evidence aligned with her memory. Jonathan Mayers, Daniel's defense attorney, leaned forward, whispering urgently to his client. "See, she remembered correctly. We need to highlight every detail." The prosecutor's hand went to her temple, her lips pressed in a thin line. She whispered to a colleague, voice low but sharp. This can't be right. There must be a recording error." But the video did not lie. Rex's barks echoed through the footage, precise and repetitive, directed at a man raising his hands in terror. Daniel recoiled, stumbling backward. And in the background, fleeting but undeniable, the smallest figure appeared, a child watching from the doorway. Lily's words echoed in everyone's mind. He barked, and Daddy fell. The footage jumped, a time lapse, but the impact of those missing frames was unmistakable. In that brief gap, Rex had been deployed, and Daniel Carter had been injured. The logs, the official report, and the prosecutor's narrative had omitted this crucial interval. Judge Whitman's eyes narrowed. He had seen bodycam footage thousands of times, but the discrepancy was clear and undeniable. "Officer Reynolds," he said, voice low but firm, "explain the missing seconds in this footage." Reynolds' face paled. He glanced at the monitor, at the frames before and after the gap, then at the judge. I don't know, Your Honor," he stammered. The report matches the footage we received. I reviewed it personally." The courtroom shifted, whispers spreading like wildfire. The prosecution team exchanged panicked glances. Their meticulously prepared case now rested on an officer's uncertainty and the observation of a 3-year-old. Jonathan Mayer stood, straightening his jacket, voice rising with controlled intensity. "Your Honor, this is exactly why we requested the full, unedited footage. It clearly shows a sequence of events that contradicts the official report. The child's testimony is not only credible, it is corroborated." Samantha Riley, the prosecutor, shot up from her chair. "Objection!" The officer reviewed the footage. "The logs are verified. The child cannot be considered a witness in determining the accuracy of law enforcement procedure." Judge Whitman raised a hand to silence the room. His gaze swept over everyone, lingering on Lily, who was sitting quietly now in her mother's lap, stuffed rabbit clutched tightly. Her small eyes reflected a clarity and focus that belied her age. "Objection noted," he said slowly, "but the court will proceed with the review. The discrepancies are evident. They cannot be ignored." Emily's knees shook as she hugged Lily. "Honey, you're so brave," she whispered. Lily's thumb went to her lips, eyes wide but unwavering. The video continued. The missing frames replayed slowly, this time in slowed motion. The sound of Rex's barking filled the room. Daniel flinched on the screen as the dog lunged forward, paws scraping against the floor. Officers shouted commands, their voices overlapping with the bark. Daniel's hands were raised, his body tense, his fear unmistakable. The jurors leaned forward, some covering their mouths. The reporters scribbled furiously, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The courtroom had transformed from a place of law into a theater of raw, undeniable truth. Reynolds swallowed hard, glancing at the prosecution team. His carefully rehearsed statements, his memory of the sequence of events, all seemed suddenly fragile. "Rex was deployed earlier than recorded," he admitted quietly, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't notice the exact moment. I didn't account for that interval." The judge's knuckles whitened on the bench. "So the official report is inaccurate," he said, calm but cutting. "The logs were incomplete and crucial evidence was omitted." Samantha Riley's face turned pale. She opened her mouth, but words failed her. All she could do was glance at the defense attorney and the screen in front of the room. Jonathan Mayer seized the moment. "Your Honor, this changes everything. The prosecution's timeline is invalidated. The child's observations are confirmed by the footage. We request that this evidence be given full consideration in evaluating the defendant's case." Daniel's shoulders sagged. Tears slipped down his cheeks, the first visible emotion he had shown all trial. He looked at Lily's small fingers intertwined with her rabbit and realized she had remembered every detail of that night, every bark, every movement, every fearful glance. Emily whispered again, stroking her daughter's hair. "You remembered, you were so brave." Lily's small hand reached out to touch her father's arm, offering reassurance. In that simple gesture, a bond stronger than any legal argument became clear. Judge Whitman's gaze swept the room. "This court has now seen the unedited footage," he said, voice firm. "It contradicts the official record, corroborates testimony previously thought inadmissible, and raises serious questions about procedural accuracy." The tension was suffocating. Officers, lawyers, jurors, spectators, all felt the weight of the truth as it settled into the room. Even Rex lowered his head, ears still pricked, sensing the courtroom's shift. Emily's voice broke as she whispered, "We're going to be okay, honey." Lily's small voice echoed, a faint but undeniable reminder of what had happened. "I saw it. I saw Daddy hurt." The courtroom went silent. The kind of silence that stretches and lingers, heavy with the knowledge that everything, every word, every document, every carefully constructed timeline, was suddenly in question. And in that silence, the room understood the terrifying power of the smallest voice. Because sometimes it takes only one child to expose a truth no adult had the courage or the clarity to see. The courtroom felt like it had been compressed into a single, taut moment. Every head was turned to the monitor where the unedited footage played again, frame by frame, each second magnified in weight. Officer Reynolds' confident demeanor had cracked. Every fiber of his body seemed tense, as though he were bracing against a storm he could not control. Even Rex, trained for chaos, remained alert, shifting uneasily on his paws, his gaze following Lily as she clutched her stuffed rabbit. Judge Whitman leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the monitor, brows furrowed. "Officer Reynolds," he said, his voice measured but firm, "you confirmed the dog's deployment occurred earlier than previously reported. Explain." Reynolds swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He had rehearsed responses to every possible question, every line of inquiry about procedure, timelines, and behavior. But none of that preparation accounted for the unedited footage, the child's testimony, and the irrefutable truth aligning in front of his eyes. I don't know, Your Honor," he admitted, voice quivering slightly. "The report, the logs, they were based on the body cam we reviewed. I didn't account for that gap, those seconds. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. The prosecution team stiffened, whispering to one another, faces tight with worry. Their confident narrative, the one that had been rehearsed, reviewed, and polished, was crumbling under the weight of raw, unfiltered observation. Jonathan Mayers, the defense attorney, stood immediately, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Your Honor, the footage proves exactly what we have been saying. The timeline is inconsistent with the official report. The child's testimony is accurate, and this officer's admission confirms that the documentation cannot be relied upon as a truthful account of events." Samantha Riley, the lead prosecutor, clenched her jaw. Her notes, which had been meticulously prepared, suddenly seemed irrelevant. Every word she had planned to argue against Daniel Carter's innocence felt like a lie in the room's tense atmosphere. "Your Honor," she began, but the judge's raised hand stopped her. "Quiet," Judge Whitman said. "The court will proceed without interruption. The evidence speaks for itself." Even the jurors, trained to maintain composure, leaned forward in their seats. The room felt smaller, walls pressing in, the air thick with the combined tension of every observer, participant, and witness. Each frame of the footage seemed to resonate beyond the monitor, touching something primal, a sense of justice, fairness, and undeniable truth. Emily Carter, kneeling beside Lily, brushed a loose curl from her daughter's forehead, tears streaming down her face. "Honey, you were so brave," she whispered, voice quivering. Lily's thumb went to her lips, but her eyes remained fixed on her father. Daniel Carter sat rigid, his hands folded tightly in front of him, jaw clenched, as he watched what he had already known and feared. The unedited truth could no longer be ignored. Jonathan Mayers continued, pressing his advantage. "Your Honor, this footage shows a clear contradiction. The dog was inside before the suspect fell. Commands were shouted, but the suspect, my client, was struck, pushed, and overwhelmed before protocol indicates he should have been. The logs and reports are inaccurate and incomplete. Rex, as if aware of the growing tension, shifted again, his ears pricked, muscles taut, eyes flicking from Lily to her father and back. Even the trained police dog seemed to understand that something fundamental had shifted. Samantha Riley's lips pressed into a thin line. Her voice shook as she spoke, though she tried to maintain authority. Your Honor, I don't understand. The body cam footage we reviewed matches our report. There must have been a technical error. Judge Whitman raised his hand, silencing her with a single, steady gesture. The discrepancy is evident. Whether technical or procedural, the timeline in the official report is inaccurate. The court will take this under advisement. The spectators, normally passive in such proceedings, leaned forward, sensing the drama unfold in real time. The murmurs of disbelief and tension ran through the room like electricity, filling the space with a charged energy. Even reporters at the back, pens hovering mid-note, froze in anticipation, realizing that the case they had expected to follow predictable lines was now unraveling in ways no one had foreseen. Daniel Carter's face crumpled, and for the first time his composure broke entirely. Tears rolled freely down his cheeks. He had faced the world's judgment, the prosecution's certainty, the officer's authority, but he had not anticipated the clarity of his daughter's memory. He looked at Lily's small fingers intertwined with her stuffed rabbit and realized the enormity of what she had accomplished. She had remembered every detail of that night, observed the sequence, and spoken the truth when no adult dared. Emily Carter whispered again, clutching her daughter. It's going to be okay, baby. You're so brave. Lily's small voice, though soft, carried an unwavering certainty across the room. I saw it. I saw Daddy hurt. Judge Whitman leaned back in his chair, letting the weight of the moment settle. This court acknowledges the child's testimony, he said, voice calm but firm. The unedited footage corroborates her account. We now confront the fact that the official report contains inaccuracies that cannot be ignored. Officer Reynolds, your testimony regarding the timeline is insufficient. Reynolds swallowed hard, nodding slightly, but he could not look away from the monitor. The images, combined with the child's memory, created a truth he could no longer deny. Jonathan Mayers took a deep breath, seizing the courtroom's attention. Your Honor, given these findings, we request immediate review of the procedure, the officer's conduct, and all associated documentation. The child's testimony has been validated, and any further proceedings must account for this evidence. Samantha Riley remained silent, face pale. Her meticulous preparation, her months of work, were now overshadowed by the small, unwavering voice of a child and the unedited, undeniable footage that backed it. Rex lowered his head slightly, ears still alert. The dog's presence in the courtroom had transformed from procedural to symbolic, a living witness to the truth that no adult had been able to fully acknowledge. Emily Carter held Lily tightly, stroking her daughter's hair. The girl's small body trembled slightly, but her eyes, bright and clear, reflected satisfaction and relief. She had spoken. She had been heard. Daniel Carter looked around the room, a mixture of fear, relief, and awe on his face. The system had failed to capture the full story, but Lily had. And now the truth, raw and undeniable, was emerging in the public light, shaking the courtroom to its core. Judge Whitman exhaled slowly. We will adjourn for a brief recess to allow the court to review the discrepancies and ensure that proper proceedings continue. This case is no longer straightforward. The testimony, corroborated by video, demands serious scrutiny. The room remained silent. Not a single person moved. The weight of what had been revealed lingered, heavy and palpable. The small voice of a child had overturned months of preparation, rewritten the narrative, and demanded justice in a way no adult testimony could. Lily finally rested her head against her mother's shoulder, exhausted but resolute. "I told the truth," she whispered. And in the courtroom, everyone understood something fundamental. Sometimes, the smallest voice carries the heaviest weight, and sometimes the smallest witness is the one who finally makes the system confront reality. Outside the courtroom, reporters prepared their broadcasts. Social media would explode in minutes. Millions would watch a 3-year-old girl confront the machinery of justice and be heard, and for the first time, the public would see how fragile even the most confident narrative could be when confronted by raw, undeniable truth. The tension did not ease. It only thickened, hanging over the room like storm clouds. The trial had changed. The courtroom and everyone in it would never see Daniel Carter or the night of the arrest in the same way again. And everyone knew it. The small voice that spoke with clarity and courage had not finished reshaping everything. The courtroom felt like it had shrunk to half its size. Every head leaned forward, every eye fixed on the monitor, on Rex, on Lily, and on the unraveling narrative that had seemed so solid just hours ago. The low hum of tension was palpable. This was no longer just a case about procedure or protocol. It was a confrontation with truth itself, raw, unfiltered, and undeniable. Judge Whitman adjusted his glasses, fingers gripping the edge of the bench, eyes sharp but weary. His voice broke the near silence, deliberate and measured. This court will proceed with a full review of the discrepancies in procedure, timeline, and documentation. Officer Reynolds, you will remain under direct scrutiny. Officer Reynolds, pale and stiff, nodded silently. His confidence had been shattered. For the first time, he realized that protocol and training could not shield him from the scrutiny of the truth, and the truth had a face far smaller, softer, and more piercing than anything he had prepared for. Rex, coiled beside him, mirrored the tension. The dog's ears twitched with every sound, the shuffle of papers, the muted clicks of pens, the low whispers between attorneys. Even he seemed aware that the foundation of the prosecution's case was crumbling. Emily Carter whispered softly to Lily, stroking her daughter's hair. "You're doing so well, baby. Just stay with me." Lily's thumb went to her lips, but her eyes never wavered from her father or the monitor. Jonathan Mayers, Daniel Carter's defense attorney, leaned forward with intensity, his voice steady but sharp. "Your Honor, the footage, combined with the child's testimony, provides evidence that the official narrative is flawed. The logs, reports, and statements from officers do not align with the actual sequence of events." Samantha Riley, the lead prosecutor, bristled. Her face tightened as she adjusted her notes. "Your Honor, we maintain that the bodycam footage and officer logs are accurate. The child's recollection, while poignant, is not a legal basis for undermining verified records." The judge's gaze was unyielding. The court acknowledges the emotional impact of testimony, but when combined with unedited footage showing discrepancies in timing and deployment, it cannot be dismissed. The jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The room, already thick with tension, seemed to vibrate with anticipation. This trial had begun with a straightforward narrative: a suspect resisting arrest, law enforcement following procedure, and the legal system documenting the events accurately. But the small voice of a 3-year-old had dismantled all of it. Daniel Carter's hands were clenched tightly in his lap. His head lifted slowly, eyes wide, as he absorbed the reality. The child had remembered every detail, every bark, every movement, every second that had been hidden or misreported. And now, the legal system was forced to confront it. Emily whispered again to her daughter, voice trembling, "You're so brave, honey, so brave." Lily's small fingers gripped the stuffed rabbit, but she straightened slightly, determination etched into her expression. "I told the truth," she whispered, barely audible, but the words were potent, reverberating across the courtroom in a way no one could ignore. Rex growled lowly, a subtle but unmistakable warning. The dog, trained to detect threat and respond to instinct, seemed to sense the courtroom's shifting dynamics, the tension, the unspoken realization that the timeline and actions had been misrepresented. Jonathan Mayer stood fully now, speaking with a force that carried to every corner of the room. "Your Honor, we request a full hearing into the officer's actions during deployment, including a review of any procedural violations or omissions. The child's testimony has been corroborated by the footage, and the inconsistencies in the official logs demand accountability." The prosecution exchanged rapid, tense whispers. Samantha Riley's hands shook slightly as she adjusted her notes. The confidence that had carried her through weeks of preparation was now replaced by uncertainty. The narrative she had relied on, the timeline she had trusted, was now questioned at its core. Judge Whitman's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on every observer, then resting on the small figure of Lily Carter. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "This court recognizes that the testimony of this child, corroborated by the unedited video, presents a factual discrepancy significant enough to warrant immediate scrutiny. The integrity of the original report is now in question." A collective murmur ran through the room. Even spectators, normally passive in the proceedings, shifted in their seats, recognizing the magnitude of what had been revealed. The case was no longer about Daniel Carter's guilt or innocence alone. It was about the credibility of the system itself. Emily Carter's tears fell freely as she hugged Lily tightly. "You saw it all, and you told the truth." Lily's small voice, calm but unwavering, reached across the room. "I saw Daddy hurt. I told them." The courtroom grew tense again, as if the very walls held their breath. The power dynamic had shifted. The prosecution, once in full control, now faced the impossible task of reconciling a child's memory with their official narrative. The defense, once hopeful, now smelled the opportunity of a lifetime. The system's credibility had been pierced. Officer Reynolds swallowed hard, hands gripping the edge of the bench. His training, his years of experience, and his meticulous documentation were now under scrutiny. The child had remembered what he had not, and the unedited footage had corroborated her observation. Every instinct, every preparation, seemed irrelevant. Jonathan Mayers continued, pressing his advantage with precision. "Your Honor, it is clear that events were not properly documented. The deployment of K-9 Rex, the response of the officers, and the sequence of actions taken have not been accurately represented in any official report. The child's testimony provides a timeline that, for the first time, aligns with the actual events." The prosecution remained silent. Their objections, their strategies, their rehearsed lines, none of it could undo what had been revealed. Judge Whitman exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "We will recess briefly to allow the court to evaluate the discrepancies and ensure that proper procedures are followed. This case is no longer straightforward. The testimony of a child, combined with evidence, has reshaped the narrative entirely." The room remained silent. Not a single person moved. Not a single word was spoken. Outside the courtroom, the tension would erupt. Reporters prepared their notes. Social media feeds were poised to explode, and the public would soon witness how a small, 3-year-old girl had reshaped a courtroom, forced adults to confront uncomfortable truths, and demanded accountability from a system built on order and control. Inside, however, the courtroom remained still. The weight of the unedited footage, combined with the piercing clarity of Lily's testimony, pressed down on every person present. Emily Carter held Lily close, whispering softly, "You're brave, baby, so brave." Lily's voice, small but fierce, whispered back, "I told the truth." And in that moment, the courtroom, and everyone in it, understood a fundamental reality. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the greatest weight. For the first time, even the most confident adults realized the walls of certainty around the case had begun to crack. And the storm was only just beginning. The courtroom was electric. Hours of tension had built to a point where every breath seemed amplified. The lights reflected off the polished wood, illuminating faces etched with fatigue, anxiety, and anticipation. Every observer knew that today, the scales of justice were balanced not on procedure alone, but on the unfiltered truth of a child. Judge Whitman sat in stoic authority, but his eyes, sharp and calculating, betrayed the weight of responsibility he carried. The unedited footage had revealed discrepancies in the official report. Officer Reynolds' admissions had shattered the credibility of the prosecution's narrative. And at the center of it all, the smallest witness in the room, Lily Carter, sat quietly in her mother's lap, a stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her hands, eyes wide but resolute. Jonathan Mayers, Daniel Carter's defense attorney, stood and addressed the courtroom with calm authority, voice carrying a sense of inevitability. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. The child's testimony, corroborated by unedited video footage, demonstrates a timeline inconsistent with the official reports. Furthermore, it raises serious concerns about procedural accuracy and the credibility of officer testimony. We request the court take all necessary steps to address these discrepancies and ensure justice is served." The room shifted uneasily. Samantha Riley, the lead prosecutor, straightened in her seat, her expression tight. She had fought for weeks, meticulously preparing her case, but every argument she had planned had been undermined by a child's memory and video evidence she could no longer ignore. "Your Honor, while the footage raises questions, it does not negate the fact that the suspect resisted arrest, and all officers acted according to training. The child's account, though moving, cannot fully replace verified reports." Judge Whitman's gaze was unwavering. "Verified reports are only as reliable as the evidence supporting them," he said slowly, voice resonant, each word deliberate. "In this case, the unedited footage contradicts official documentation. Moreover, the child's testimony, though unusual in its age and presentation, provides corroboration that cannot be ignored. The integrity of the justice system relies on transparency and accountability. This court must address the discrepancies revealed today." Daniel Carter's hands, folded tightly in his lap, relaxed slightly. The relief he had dared not hope for began to seep in. Emily Carter clutched Lily closer, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Honey, you were so brave," she whispered, voice trembling. Lily's thumb went to her lips, but her eyes, large and unflinching, never left her father. "I told the truth," she whispered softly. Judge Whitman turned his gaze to Officer Reynolds. "Officer, the court recognizes your years of service and dedication. However, the discrepancies in your report and the footage raise questions regarding procedural accuracy. The court will refer this matter for further internal review, and any necessary action will follow according to policy." Reynolds' face paled. He swallowed hard, words failing him. He had trained for danger, for unpredictable scenarios, for aggression, but he had not prepared for accountability in the face of a child's memory and indisputable video evidence. Samantha Riley's hands trembled slightly as she gathered her notes. The prosecution's narrative had been dismantled, step, by evidence that no carefully rehearsed argument could overcome. The room seemed heavier with each passing second. Jonathan Mayers, sensing the moment, addressed the jury directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have now witnessed a sequence of events that contradicts the official report. You have seen testimony from a child who observed events accurately and independently, corroborated by video evidence. In weighing the facts, you must consider the truth that has been presented, unfiltered and undeniable." The jurors exchanged glances. The weight of responsibility pressed down on them, the kind of clarity that only comes from evidence so visceral and undeniable that it cannot be ignored. They had been trained to observe, to weigh, to deliberate. Now, they had been presented with a truth so raw it transcended procedure. Outside, the media sensed the magnitude of the moment. Cameras rolled, live feeds streamed the courtroom drama to millions. Social media erupted in real time, viewers awed by the story of a 3-year-old whose clarity and courage had exposed the fragility of human error and institutional overconfidence. Inside, Daniel Carter finally allowed himself to exhale. He looked at Lily, small but radiant in her clarity, and felt a profound mixture of awe, relief, and gratitude. The child who had once been shielded from the world had become the center of it, not by choice, but by necessity. She had observed, she had remembered, and she had spoken. Emily Carter's tears continued to flow as she whispered again to Lily, "You did it, baby. You told the truth, and they had to hear it." Lily's eyes, bright and unyielding, scanned the room once more, lingering on Rex, on the officers, on the jurors, and finally on her father. "I saw it all," she said softly, voice steady. The judge's gavel came down, sharp and final. "This court acknowledges the discrepancies in the official report and the corroborated testimony of the child witness. The matter will proceed with full consideration of these findings. The court recognizes the courage of the witness and the responsibility of all parties to ensure that the facts are represented accurately." A collective exhale passed through the courtroom. Relief, tension, and disbelief mingled in the air. The official narrative had been challenged. Accountability had been demanded. The smallest voice had spoken, and the system, slow, deliberate, and often rigid, had been forced to listen. Outside, the press swarmed, cameras capturing every detail. Headlines would declare the bravery of a 3-year-old, the unraveling of a case once thought airtight, and the moment when truth refused to be silenced. Millions would watch, and few would forget the story of Lily Carter, whose clarity and courage had reshaped the narrative of justice. Inside the courtroom, Emily hugged Lily, tears still flowing freely. "You were so brave, honey, so brave." Daniel Carter, chest still heaving, reached down to hold his daughter's hand. "You saved me," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Lily looked up at him, small hand gripping his tightly, and smiled faintly. "I told the truth," she said simply. Rex, the ever-watchful German shepherd, lowered his head, ears pricked but body relaxed slightly. Even the dog seemed to recognize the shift, the tension released, the truth finally acknowledged, the smallest witness having made the greatest impact. Judge Whitman finally spoke again, voice carrying over the quiet room. "Let this court reflect on the events of today, that truth, no matter the source, must always be heard, that even the smallest voice can carry the heaviest weight, and that justice, when tempered with observation, integrity, and courage, can prevail." The courtroom remained silent, heavy with reflection. The gavel struck once more, signaling adjournment. People began to rise, conversations low and hurried, but the weight of what had occurred lingered in every mind. Emily Carter carried Lily from the bench, each step deliberate, steady, the child's small hand intertwined with hers. Daniel followed, still absorbing the enormity of what had transpired. Outside, the press awaited, cameras flashing, questions shouted. But for the Carters, the world had narrowed to one simple, undeniable truth. Lily's voice had been heard. And in that hearing, justice, raw, unfiltered, and undeniable, had been affirmed. For once, the smallest voice in the room had changed everything. The courtroom would never be the same. The system would never be the same. And for Lily, Daniel, and Emily Carter, the moment would linger forever, a testament to observation, courage, and the power of speaking the truth, no matter how small the speaker. Because sometimes, it takes only a child to make the world listen.